Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be going over some alterations that you guys can make to the panty block that we drafted a while back. I know it's been a while, I'm sorry. Bear with me while I get back into things again. But one of the things that I wanted to show you guys in this video specifically, about a year ago, I want to say, I made a post. I was asking what you guys wanted to see, and quite a few of you wanted to see patterning and sewing techniques to help accommodate a plus size body, and so I am here to help you guys with that in this specific video. So one of the things that I personally have had issues with in the past whenever I'm drafting for myself, because a lot of pattern books do not mention how to accommodate plus size bodies or how to accommodate anyone that has any kind of extra pockets of fat anywhere on their body. One of the things that I tried doing anyways, was I tried making myself a skirt off of my skirt block. And typically, unless you have made a block that specifically has darts and style lines in it that curves under, like say a pooch for instance, if you just lower, just chop off where you want it at and just lower the waistline like normal, it's not going to work for you because you're gonna have all of this extra fabric there. And that's what happened to me whenever I tried to make myself a lower rise skirt. I had a whole lot of extra fabric there because my stomach, it goes here and then it dips under like a little bit below my belly button and goes to where my bikini line is. So it goes here and then goes straight down from there. And so that difference is what I had excess of, because like I said, your skirt, whenever you make the blocks and stuff for it, it's going to just kind of drape over that, because most people, they're not wanting it to cling to every curve. They kind of want it to be smoothed out. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but that's typically how it is. And it's the same thing with your blocks for your panty that we just made. Even though it is a knit and it can conform a little bit better than a woven pattern might, you can still run into that issue, especially if you have a big difference there. So I want to go over how you can lower that waistline and accommodate for any drop-offs that you might have like that. And then the other thing I wanted to show you guys too is how to change the leg line. So we made kind of a vintage style cut. That's not really something that I like for myself. I don't think it's very flattering personally. So I'm going to show you guys how to fit the mock-up on you and change the leg line just based off of your final mock-up that you made for that panty block. And that way you can change it to a French cut, or something that's a little cheekier in the back, shows a little bit more butt cheek, or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys that so you have all the tools that you need in order to make whatever bikini bottom you guys want. Okay, enough rambling, so let's get into the video. Okay guys, let's talk belly pooches. So mine is mostly just center front. However, I know some people have that horizontal belly line and it goes all the way to your hips. And that's fine. This is all gonna work no matter how big your pooch is. But you can kind of see I have a little bit of that drop off from below my belly button down to my pubic bone. I'm kind of pushing the fabric here so you can see, because it's basically just floating right there for now. You can't see it curve under. But what we're going to do is, because I want my bikini to sit below my pooch, I'm going to pinch that fabric that's just floating there. I'm just going to pinch it and pin that out. And I'm using safety pins because this is a knit fabric and it's going to be easier when you take it on and off for those pins to stay. But yeah, so basically I'm just pinning where that excess fabric is sitting. And so whenever I lower the waistline, it's not going to include that fabric there. And I'll show you guys in a little bit how we're going to actually adjust the pattern to accommodate that. So that's the first thing I'm doing before I do anything else. Just make sure that when you're pinning, you're not doing it enough that your side seam is going to be distorted. Now I'm going to start pinning in where I want my waist to hit. So right below my pooch is where I want my waist to hit. If you're doing it above your pooch, you're not going to necessarily need to take out that bit in the front that we did a second ago. It's really only if you're below your pooch that you would need to do that. So keep that in mind. And you're just going to repeat this method of pinning with the safety pins all the way around to the back. You only need to do half your body, so half the front, half the back, because we're doing our pattern on the fold. But yeah, you're just going to use these safety pins and go around. It was difficult for me to pin myself when I got to the back. So you might look to see if there's somebody who can help you do this part. Otherwise, it's a good idea to take it on and off and just check and see where it's hitting in the back whenever you actually remove the bottoms, and that is going to help you get a good placement on how low you want the back to go. For the leg holes, the process is the exact same. So I'm going to start in the back because I generally like the shape of the front for the most part. I like the coverage that I have there. So I'm going to go ahead and start in the back, and I'm just going to start where I want the side seam to come up to. So the leg hole is a little bit low on the sides. So I'm going to actually bring that up a little bit. And I'm also going to cut in on the cheeks. Like I said before, I don't like how full coverage the bottoms are in the back. So I'm going to just raise that up a little bit. And like I said, this is really difficult to do by yourself. So it is easier if you have somebody with you to help pin while you look in a mirror. But like I said, I didn't have anybody, so I'm just doing the best I can on my own. When you're pinning the back, just make sure that you're putting a pin at the curviest part of the leg hole, which is going to be about the middle of your back leg hole. Now, when it comes to doing the front leg hole, regardless of whether I am doing a high cut or if I'm going to keep it low like what I'm doing right now, I like to put a pin at kind of the spot that I want my leg hole to be blended to. So this is kind of like the non-negotiable stopping point for me. I don't want anything to cut past this because then it's going to not provide enough coverage in the crotch area. And that's just me personally. Some people like it to cut in, and that's fine too. I personally do not. So I like to put a pin where I need it to stop. Moving on to our pattern, we're first going to work on the front of our pattern. So we're first going to want to locate where our center front waist is going to hit. Now I have 2 pins here, so obviously you want to make sure that you are measuring to your horizontal pin and not the vertical one. And then also make sure that you are measuring down to the pin, the part of the pin that's actually going through your garment, not the part that's hanging, because that can add quite a bit to your measurement. So we're going to measure down from our center front waist down to where we want our new waistline to be. And we're going to transfer that measurement right on over to our pattern. Keep in mind, my pattern has no seam allowance or elastic allowance or anything like that on it at the moment. So when you see me working on mine, just keep that in the back of your head. And we're going to do the same thing for our side seam. I'm going to go ahead and get both of these measurements really quickly. And I'm going to measure up from the bottom just because I feel like it's easier. So I have a 1/2 inch measurement to my bottom pin and about 2 3/4 of an inch to my top pin. And doing the exact same thing, I'm going to transfer those markings to my pattern as well. And the last pin that we need to transfer to our pattern is this one that's on the leg hole. Now, I'm not going to lie, this one can be a little bit tricky, especially if you pulled your elastic really tight when you were sewing it to the leg hole, because it's going to be pulling all of that fabric in. And so it's a little bit harder to match up to your pattern. But the goal here is to get it as close as possible. It does not have to be perfect. So just keep that in mind whenever you're trying to get this and you're fiddling with it. I guarantee you that any amount that you think it's too far off, you probably won't even be able to tell visually because it's just a few millimeters and the elastic's going to eat up the difference. So think about this pin as more of a guideline than anything else. So here you can see that I have a little bit less than an inch of a difference between my side seam on my pattern and the side seam of my garment. I'm just stretching this ever so slightly to make it fit, and then I'm marking where it's actually landing at on my pattern. And the last measurement we need to get is the measurement for our pooch. So if you look back at your bikini bottom, you're going to measure from the fold of center front to where your pin ends. So it's going to be equal on both sides. So keep in mind that your measurement is actually going to be double that because it's on the fold. So whenever I measured mine, I got 1/2 of an inch, and since it's on the fold, that's actually going to be 1 inch total that I'm going to need to remove from the circumference of my new waistline in order to accommodate for that pooch. Now, since we are working on 1/2 of our front and 1/2 of our back, each of those pieces are 1/4 of our total circumference. So because of that, we're going to divide whatever measurement we just got by 4. So I got 1/2 of an inch, doubled it because it's on the fold, so it makes it 1 inch, and we're dividing that by 4 because we're working with 1/4 of our pattern at a time. So my total measurement that I'm going to take off of the side seam at the waist is going to be 1/4 of an inch. And yes, I am marking 1/8 of an inch here and not 1/4 of an inch like I should be. I did have to go back and later fix that, so don't make the same mistake I did. Once you have that point marked, you can blend it to your other marking that you made for the bottom of your side seam. I'm using a French curve here, but you can also just straighten this out. It's honestly personal preference. I would say that the shorter your side seam is, the less it matters. If you have a really long side seam, you might keep a curve in there just for better fit, but like I said, personal preference. And at this point, it's just a matter of connecting all the dots. So I'm going to go ahead and square out from center front at our new marking because I don't want that to become a point whenever I cut it out on the fold. So just make sure that that's 90 degrees so that doesn't happen. I also like to do this on my side seams, though it's really not necessary. If you match your front and back side seams together and it doesn't create a point and it's a nice and smooth transition from one to the other, then you're fine. I personally just like to square them off now. That way I can work on my pieces independently and I don't have to worry about constantly, matching them up to make sure that a point's not there and redrawing the line and all that. I just think that this is simpler. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my French curve and I'm just going to draw in a nice smooth curve going from the center front to the side seam. My curve isn't very long, so I'm kind of doing this in halves, but if you have a hip curve or something, you can do that as well. Also, you can see I opted not to transfer markings from any other part on the front waistline other than the side seam and center front. That was just personal choice. If you want to transfer those markings and then just connect all the dots, you absolutely can. I just thought this would be easier for me to show you guys. Now I'm just going to make another line that is 90 degrees on the bottom of our new side seam, and then I'm going to connect that one placement pin that I put on the lower part of the leg line. I'm going to connect that to the side seam and just try and blend as nicely as possible to where that curve is just a nice smooth transition. Moving on to our back piece. So our back waist is going to be the exact same process. We don't need to take any of the side seam measurements because we already have those when we did the front. So really the only measurement that we need to do is to take one from our old waistline down to our new waistline at the center back. For the back waistline and side seam, we're going to do the exact same thing that we did for the front. So we're going to mark our new center back waist, our new side seam, both the top and the bottom of the side seam, and we're going to take off the same amount that we took off on the front side seam to accommodate for our pooch. And we're going to connect everything together using our French curve. Moving on to our back leg line, what we're really trying to do is get it as smooth as possible from our side seam down. Don't forget that your crotch seam is going to curve under, so you're not going to be able to completely lay it flat more than likely. But like I said, this is the most difficult part for you to copy off perfectly. The main thing that I would keep an eye out for and try and get right is if you lay the curviest part of the pattern down with the curviest part of your bottoms. This is kind of where the most coverage is typically needed. So if you can get that pin traced off properly onto your pattern, I feel like you have the best shot at being able to get the proper amount of coverage that you want, as well as getting the right shape that you want. And here I'm just using my French curve to connect all the dots to get like a rough shape, but I do kind of go back and tweak the shape a little bit. Just personal preference once again, and just kind of feeling it out. I'm not going to know for sure whether or not this is the exact shape that I'm going to end up with until I actually make it up and see how it's laying on my body, because I didn't do a ton of pins in mine. But if you put a lot of pins in yours, then you might have a more accurate shape to what you want. But I wasn't 100% sure what shape I wanted, just how much coverage I wanted. So I'm just going to kind of play with it a little bit till I get a shape that looks nice to me, and I'll just find out later on whenever I make this up. And at this point, we're basically done, so we can go ahead and cut it out. If you want to add seam allowance, go ahead and do that before you cut it out. But at this point, you can add your seam allowance. You can walk the side seams together from front to back and make sure that it has a nice transition. And then also, I like to kind of sew together the pattern at the crotch seam as well, and just make sure that that doesn't look too sharp of a curve, because it will be too difficult to add elastic to that later if it's too sharp. So I like to double check that. And you can see that my front piece is looking a little bit sharp right there on the curve, so I might go back and fix that later. But at this point, you're pretty much done. I like to label my pieces at this point, make sure that I have my grain lines on both my patterns, make sure that I've indicated that the front and the back are on the fold. And if I have seam allowance, I will go ahead and add any notches at this point as well.